The Sioux are a Native American tribe and First Nations band government in North America. The term can refer to any ethnic group within the Great Sioux Nation or any of the nation's many language dialects. The Sioux comprise three major divisions based on Siouan dialect and subculture: the Santee, the Yankton, and the Lakota. The Santee, also called Eastern Dakota, reside in the extreme east of the Dakotas, Minnesota and northern Iowa. The Yankton and Yankton, collectively also referred to as the Western Dakota or by the endonym Wichita, reside in the Minnesota River area. They are considered to be the Middle Sioux, and have in the past been erroneously classified as Nakota. The Lakota, also called Teton, are the westernmost Sioux, known for their hunting and warrior culture. Today, the Sioux maintain many separate tribal governments scattered across several reservations, communities, and reserves in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Minnesota, and Montana in the United States, and Manitoba and southern Saskatchewan in Canada. Etymology: the name Sioux is an abbreviated form of Nadua Sioux borrowed into Canadian French from Nadouesh from the early Odawa exonym, Nadazawag, Sioux. Jean Nicolet recorded the use in 1640. The Proto-Algonquin form *Natowa, meaning Northern Iroquoian, has reflexes in several daughter languages that refer to a small rattlesnake. This information was interpreted by some that the Odawa borrowing was an insult. However, this Proto-Algonquin term most likely was ultimately derived from a form *to, meaning simply, to speak a foreign language, which would make it similar to the etymology of the Greek barbarian. Later this was extended in meaning in some Algonquin languages to refer to the Massasauga. Thus, contrary to many accounts, the old Odawa word Nadazawag did not equate the Sioux with snakes. This is not confirmed though, since usage over the previous decades has led to this term having negative connotations to those tribes to which it refers. This would explain why many tribes have rejected this term as an exonym. One source states that the name Sioux derives from a Chippewa word meaning little snake. Ojibwa, or Chippewa, is a dialectic variant of Odawa. The current Ojibwa term for the Sioux and related groups is Bwan, meaning roaster. Presumably, this refers to the style of cooking the Sioux used in the past. Some of the tribes have formally or informally adopted traditional names. The Rosebud Sioux tribe is also known as the Sachangu Oyate, and the Ogallala often use the name Ogallala Lakota Oyate, rather than the English Ogallala Sioux tribe, or OST. The alternative English speaking of Ogallala is considered improper. ʻŌkethiSakavin. The historical Sioux refer to the Great Sioux Nation as the ʻŌkethiSakavin, meaning seven council fires. Each fire was a symbol of an Oyate. The seven nations that comprise the Sioux are Iwakanthunwan, Wapethunwan, Wapekut, Sisidunwan, the Ithankthunwan, Ithankthunwana, and the Thithunwan. The seven council fires would assemble each summer to hold council, renew kinships, decide tribal matters, and participate in the Sun Dance. The seven divisions would select four leaders known as Wichasayatapika from among the leaders of each division. Being one of the four leaders was considered the highest honor for a leader. However, the annual gathering meant the majority of tribal administration was cared for by the usual leaders of each division. The last meeting of the seven council fires was in 1850. Today the Teton, Santee and the Minnesota Dakota, and Yankton, are usually known, respectively, as the Lakota, Eastern Dakota, or Western Dakota. In any of the three main dialects, Lakota, or Dakota, translate to mean friend, or more properly, ally. Usage of Lakota or Dakota may then refer to the alliance that once bound the Great Sioux Nation. History. First contacts with Europeans. The Dakota are first recorded to have resided at the source of the Mississippi River during the 17th century. By 1700 some had migrated to present-day South Dakota. Late in the 17th century, the Dakota entered into an alliance with French merchants. The French were trying to gain advantage in the struggle for the North American fur trade against the English, who had recently established the Hudson's Bay Company relationship with French traders. The first recorded encounter between the Sioux and the French occurred when Radisson and Groseilliers reached what is now Wisconsin during the winter of 1659–60. Later visiting French traders and missionaries included Claude-Jean Allières, Daniel Graysol and Duluth, and Pierre-Charles Le Sueur, who wintered with Dakota bands in early 1700. In 1736, a group of Sioux killed Jean-Baptiste de la Vérendrye and 20 other men on an island in Lake of the Woods. However, trade with the French continued until after the French gave up North America in 1763. Relationship with Pawnees. Author and historian Mark van der Logt wrote, although military historians tend to reserve the concept of total war for conflicts between modern industrial nations, the term nevertheless most closely approaches the state of affairs between the Pawnees and the Sioux and Cheyennes. Both sides directed their actions not solely against warrior combatants but against the people as a whole. Non-combatants were legitimate targets. It is within this context that the military service of the Pawnee Scouts must be viewed. The Battle of Massacre Canyon on August 5, 1873, was the last major battle between the Pawnee and the Sioux. Dakota War of 1862. By 1862, shortly after a failed crop the year before and a winter starvation, the federal payment was late. The local traders would not issue any more credit to the Santee, and one trader, Andrew Myrick, went so far as to say, "If they're hungry, let them eat grass." On August 17, 1862, the Dakota War began when a few Santee men murdered a white farmer and most of his family. They inspired further attacks on white settlements along the Minnesota River. The Santee attacked the trading post. Later settlers found Myrick among the dead with his mouth stuffed full of grass. On November 5, 1862, in Minnesota, in courts-martial, 303 Santee Sioux were found guilty of rape and murder of hundreds of American settlers. They were sentenced to be hanged. No attorneys or witnesses were allowed as a defense for the accused, and many were convicted in less than 5 minutes of court time with the judge. President Abraham Lincoln commuted the death sentences of 284 of the warriors, while signing off on the hanging of 38 Santee men on December 26, 1862 in Mankato, Minnesota. It was the largest mass execution in U.S. history. Afterwards, the U.S. suspended treaty annuities to the Dakota for 4 years and awarded the money to the white victims and their families. The men remanded by order of President Lincoln were sent to a prison in Iowa, where more than half died. During and after the revolt, many Santee and their kin fled Minnesota and eastern Dakota to Canada, or settled in the James River Valley in a short-lived reservation before being forced to move to Crow Creek Reservation on the east bank of the Missouri. A few joined the Yanktonais and moved further west to join with the Lakota bands to continue their struggle against the United States military. Others were able to remain in Minnesota and the East, in small reservations existing into the 21st century, including Siston Wahpeton, Flandreau, and Devil's Lake reservations in the Dakotas. Some ended up in Nebraska, where the Santee Sioux tribe today has a reservation on the south bank of the Missouri. Those who fled to Canada now have descendants residing on 9 small Dakota reserves, 5 of which are located in Manitoba and the remaining 4 in Saskatchewan. Red Cloud's War. Red Cloud's War was an armed conflict between the Lakota and the United States Army in the Wyoming Territory and the Montana Territory from 1866 to 1868. The war was fought over control of the Powder River country in north-central Wyoming. The war is named after Red Cloud, a prominent Sioux chief who led the war against the United States following encroachment into the area by the U.S. military. The war ended with the Treaty of Fort Laramie. The Sioux victory in the war led to their temporarily preserving their control of the Powder River country. Great Sioux War of 1876–77. The Great Sioux War comprised a series of battles between the Lakota and allied tribes such as the Cheyenne against the United States military. The earliest engagement was the Battle of Powder River, and the final battle was the Wolf Mountain. Included are the Battle of the Rosebud, Battle of the Little Bighorn, Battle of War Bonnet Creek, Battle of Slim Buttes, Battle of Cedar Creek, and the Dull Knife Fight. The Great Sioux War of 1876–77 was also known as the Black Hills War, and was centered on the Lakota tribes of the Sioux. Although several natives believe that the primary target of the United States military was the Northern Cheyenne tribe, the series of battles occurred in Montana Territory, Dakota Territory, and Wyoming Territory, and resulted in a victory for the United States military. Wounded Knee Massacre. The massacre at Wounded Knee Creek was the last major armed conflict between the Lakota and the United States. It was described as a massacre by General Nelson A. Miles in a letter to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. On December 29, 1890, 500 troops of the U.S. 7th Cavalry, supported by 4 Hotchkiss guns, surrounded an encampment of the Lakota bands of the Minneconjou and Hunkpapa with orders to escort them to the railroad for transport to Omaha, Nebraska. By the time it was over, 25 troopers and more than 150 Lakota Sioux lay dead, including men, women, and children. It remains unknown which side was responsible for the first shot. Some of the soldiers are believed to have been the victims of friendly fire, because the shooting took place at point-blank range in chaotic conditions. Around 150 Lakota are believed to have fled the chaos, many of whom may have died from hypothermia. Reserves and First Nations. Later in the 19th century, the railroads hired hunters to exterminate the buffalo herds, the Indians' primary food supply. The Santee and Lakota were forced to accept white-defined reservations in exchange for the rest of their lands, in domestic cattle and corn in exchange for buffalo. They became dependent upon annual federal payments guaranteed by treaty. In Minnesota, the treaties of Traverse des Sioux and Mendota in 1851 left the Sioux with a reservation 20 miles wide on each side of the Minnesota River. Today, 1/2 of all enrolled Sioux in the United States live off the reservation. Enrolled members in any of the Sioux tribes in the United States are required to have ancestry that is at least 1/4 degree Sioux. In Canada, the Canadian government recognizes the tribal community as First Nations. The land holdings of these First Nations are called Indian reserves. Modern reservations, reserves, and communities. Reserves shared with other First Nations. 20th century activism. Wounded Knee incident. Beginning in the late 1960s, young Native Americans began to agitate for improved conditions, respect for their civil rights, and better programs in education and economic development. Dramatic protests were conceived and carried out, such as the occupation of Alcatraz Island in California. The Wounded Knee incident began February 27, 1973, when the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota, was seized by followers of the American Indian movement. The occupiers controlled the town for 71 days while various state and federal law enforcement agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Marshals Service laid siege. 2 members of AIM were killed by gunfire during the incident. Republic of Lakota. The Lakota Freedom Delegation, a group of controversial Native American activists, declared on December 19, 2007 the Lakota were withdrawing from all treaties signed with the United States to regain sovereignty over their nation. One of the activists, Russell Means, claimed that the action is legal and cites natural, international and U.S. law. The group considers Lakota to be a sovereign nation, although as yet the state is generally unrecognized. The proposed borders reclaim thousands of square kilometers of North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska and Montana. Current activism. The Lakota Sioux made national news when NPR's Lost Children, Shattered Families investigative story aired. It exposed what many critics consider to be the kidnapping of Lakota children from their homes by the state of South Dakota's Department of Social Services. Lakota activists such as Madonna Thunderhawk and Chase Iron Eyes, along with the People's Law Project, have alleged that Lakota grandmothers are illegally denied the right to foster their own grandchildren. They are currently working to redirect federal funding away from the state of South Dakota's DSS to new tribal foster care programs. This would be a historic shift away from the state's traditional control over Lakota foster children. In early 2014, a Lakota group launched Mazacoin, a digital currency that is claimed to be the national currency of the traditional Lakota Nation political organization. The historical political organization was based on individual participation and the cooperation of many to sustain the tribe's way of life. Leaders were chosen based upon noble birth and demonstrations of chiefly virtues, such as bravery, fortitude, generosity, and wisdom. Political leaders were members of the NACA Omnisciu Society and decided matters of tribal hunts, camp movements, whether to make war or peace with their neighbors, or any other community action. Societies were similar to fraternities. Men joined to raise their position in the tribe. Societies were composed of smaller clans and varied in number among the 7 divisions. There were 2 types of societies: Akachita, for the younger men, and NACA, for elders and former leaders. Akachita societies existed to train warriors, hunters, and to police the community. There were many smaller Akachita societies, including the Kit Fox, Strong Heart, Elk, and so on. Leaders in the NACA societies, per NACA Omnisciu, were the tribal elders and leaders. They elected 7 to 10 men, depending on the division, each referred to as Witch-Asurithanshon. Each Witch-Asurithanshon interpreted and enforced the decisions of the NACA. The Witch-Asurithanshon would elect 2 to 4 shirt wearers, who were the voice of the society. They settled quarrels among families and also foreign nations. Shirt wearers were often young men from families with hereditary claims of leadership. However, men with obscure parents, who displayed outstanding leadership skills and had earned the respect of the community, might also be elected. Crazy Horse is an example of a common-born shirt wearer. Away Kitchuns are ranked below the shirt wearers. The pipe holders regulated peace ceremonies, selected camp locations, and supervised the Akachita societies during buffalo hunts. Linguistics. The Sioux comprise 3 closely related language groups: Eastern Dakota Santee Sistan, Western Dakota Yankton Yanktone, Lakota. The earlier linguistic 3-way division of the Sioux language identified Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota as dialects of a single language, where Lakota equals Teton, Dakota equals Santee Sistan, and Nakota equals Yankton Yanktone. However, the latest studies show that Yankton Yanktone never used the autonym Nakota, but pronounced their name roughly the same as the Santee. These later studies identify Assiniboine and Stoney as 2 separate languages, with Sioux being the 3rd language. Sioux has 3 similar dialects: Lakota, Western Dakota, and Eastern Dakota. Assiniboine and Stoney speakers refer to themselves as Nakota or Nakoda. The term Dakota has also been applied by anthropologists and governmental departments to refer to all Sioux groups, resulting in names such as Teton Dakota, Santee Dakota, etc. This was mainly because of the misrepresented translation of the Ottawa word from which Sioux is derived.